Welcome to the Contrarians and to a Contrarian special. Our very own Martin Popoff welcomes Peter Jones tonight to the discussion. The title, Behind the Beat and Ahead of the Beat. Get ready, this is great. Enjoy.
All right, welcome back to the Contrarians. We've got another special show here. I so much enjoyed talking to Peter about drumming. People love that episode. He's a wise music swami, period, but he's definitely extra uber wise when it comes to drumming. So we had a great chat about drumming the other day, and Peter reached out to me, and we batted back and forth a bunch of topics on drumming. And one that's always fascinated with me, or has been fascinating to me, and I have a lot of questions about it. And he's written back some really cool things, and we're going to go through some of this. Is this idea of playing behind the beat or playing ahead of the beat? It's always been this weird kind of thing where I've always equated it to, the Platonic ideal of great songwriting, where you know it when you hear it, but you can't describe it. It's just such a strange, abstract concept. And I'm kind of like a behind the beat, ahead of the beat skeptic. So I might push back a little bit here and basically say, I don't know, how does this even work? How does this mathematically work, kind of thing? So without further ado, I want to introduce Peter. How are you doing? You ready to go for this?
Yeah,
all right.
I'm great. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of going off the cuff here, and I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a couple of his comments and have him comment on it, and we'll just kind of go back and forth a little bit. So here's what we had in Messenger. Peter wrote to me and said, here's a perfect example. The first example is metronomically correct, meaning it is in time and accurate. Listen to it for a bit. This is listening to My Girl, right? This was the Temptations, right?
Correct.
My links are not showing here because my blue ink has gone out, and I'm reading off of this here, a printout. He goes, now listen to the original drummer, Benny Benjamin. It's an entirely different song now, as the feel is much more comfortable and laid back. So Peter showed me two versions of this. Go back to the first one here, how sterile it is, even if it is technically precise. It's all because of where that snare drum backbeat is being placed. The best groove players always try to sound like Benny Benjamin. So I'll stop there. Tell me why you sent me this Temptations example and how this illustrates this point.
Sure. It's an example that I think is so relevant today because we live in the perfect age. The lining up of things, the computerization, the programming, everything is on a spot, on a dot, in its place, neat, tucked, and orderly. Well, I contend that has created the exact opposite effect for good art, and especially good music. It's made it lifeless, soulless. And it really comes down to something very simple. Every single human being that's alive has a heartbeat. If we listen to each person's heartbeat, they're all different. They emphasize different, they push different, they're in different, obviously, ranges based on our size, our age, our health, all those kinds of things. So that is an internal thing that we have as human beings. When you start to line something up, and I'm going to show it to you this way. If we have 4 beats, to most people, they think of them as dots, a point of reference within a certain tempo or speed, and that you need to line those up. Well, okay, that is technically, as I said in the first example, metronomically correct. What that means is everything lines up with each beat as the drummer is playing a hi-hat and a snare and a bass drum. They're in synchronicity with each other, at least technically. They mask and hit right at the same spot. But that's not the way the human works. The human works like this. Those spots are more dashes. And you have the ability to decide where in that dash you're actually going to play your beat. Now, you say, well, that at a faster tempo, that dash is pretty tiny. But in a slower song or a medium tempo song, these dashes start to expand. So now you have a choice. You can hit it early in the dash, in the center of the dash, or at the end of the dash. And where you hit that in relation to the other things that you're playing changes the feel substantially. And I contend that most people have started to believe and accept, and especially in the studio world, the more you play slightly behind that dash towards the end, it does a couple things. It creates some weight, a little bit more space. And what's so important about music, Martin, is not always the notes we play, it's the ones we don't. It is the breath between what we play. For every one beat, there is a space of breath between it. If we're playing eighth notes on a standard rock beat, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, if I take those ands out, they're still there. I'm just not playing them 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, or 1 and how I play those ands determines where my next beat goes, which changes the feels of the song. And that's why I was showing, because the first example is lined up more machine-like. It's more drum machine-ish. And then the second one, of course, has a human being. And that's why they feel so different to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. So, and you've got some other examples of behind the beat here. And I was just kind of looking into it a little bit, like, you know, you wonder about, that was a perfect explanation that actually takes away my pushback on it. The idea of, I like that concept of the dots versus the dash sort of thing. But right, as I played these examples, and we've got another one we're going to talk about in a second, this Genesis example, what I noticed is that there seems to be some tricks to cause you to your brain to think things are playing behind the beat. And sometimes it's the setup fill. Sometimes it's how much reverb there is on a snare. If something has kind of a shotgun effect, like an echo effect, right?
Yep.
And then another one that's kind of interesting is the idea of, you know, a splash cymbal or playing a cymbal with mallets, or even more so playing a cymbal with two mallets. Like, think of the idea of you know, when you start quietly on a single stroke roll on a cymbal with mallets,
right?
You know, you start on the beat, but you don't. It's a reverse fade, so it's reverse decay. Right. So it fades in, kind of thing. So I've noticed on a lot of rock songs, you can get that behind the beat effect by how much reverse decay there is in the splashiness of a cymbal hit, right?
Right.
You know, so I've always thought, like one that interestingly isn't in your list here, and we'll go through your list, but the first guy I think of all the time is Charlie Watts.
Absolutely.
As a behind,
he's on my list. I just hadn't grabbed an example.
Yeah, it's almost like too obvious, maybe, right? And you think of something like Emotional Rescue or Honky Tonk Women, right? You think of
Miss
that.
You.
What's that? Miss You.
Miss You. Yeah. It's just perfect.
Well, okay. So Miss You brings up an interesting case here. So also another thing that causes the behind the beat thing is that structure, say in something like Miss You, or no, I'm thinking Emotional Rescue. So when you get those reggae accents, right? That's another thing that wires your brain to be thinking of a behind the beat thing, right?
Right.
So, but it's so weird. It's like well, the dash thing kind of explains it for me, but I kind of have always thought in the back of my mind, if you play behind the beat all the time, don't you just slow the song down by the end of the song?
And here's the reason. And here's the thing.
Yeah.
From a drummer's standpoint, as part of the rhythm section, each individual player cannot decide to play behind the beat on their own arbitrarily. It is within a system, and with the drummer itself, the rest of the limbs are to be played, as I say, in as center of that dash as possible. That should be your first target. To find the center, right where it hits, you keep your hi-hat hand, your bass drum in those centers. The snare is the one you alter. So you're not slowing down because you are keeping accurate time with your hands on the cymbals and the bass drum. It's the snare that by pushing forward, hitting the center, or pushing towards the end is what changes the feel, because that's how important that backbeat is. And when I say backbeat to people who don't know, it's beats 2 and 4, the ones that make us dance. Boom, bam, 2, bam, boom, bam. The bams are 2 and 4. Those are the ones that make us feel and move. So you keep a static constant as best you can. If you're dragging, you're dragging. That means you are just playing too slow behind the intended tempo, and that's dragging.
Yeah.
And if you go too far and try and put that beat too far back, you will get this kind of sloppy lifelessness that will make someone's perception, oh, he's dragging.
Yeah.
And that's
another thing, Peter, that I find interesting is the idea of that reverb shotgun effect thing that can be achieved by a drummer with a flam effect, right? So a flam effect can be something where it's a true flam, like both hands on the snare, right. But it's interesting that I suppose in that dash versus the dot, you could have a sloppiness, a flam effect between your cymbal and your snare, or your hi-hat and your snare, or your bass and your snare, right?
Yeah.
You can have a badump, right?
Absolutely. And here's that. And let's take your badump and let's go one step further. The bass player then will and should, if you're playing in synchronicity with each other, line up with the static portion of your playing, the hi-hat. And in a sense, their note, if you're playing ahead, your snare, if you line them up visually, the snare goes here and the bass may be just a slight bit off. It's almost like double tracking a vocal from like the 70s. Gillan did it all the time, where it was so just slightly different to give you the sense of weight, because what that does is it implies that dash is even longer. Because you're still feeling the same beat. It hasn't gone to the next beat, but it's longer. And the thing is a snare drum, how it's tuned, how it's recorded, how it's mixed, and how it's processed makes a huge difference. Here, perfect example. I refuse to play Def Leppard songs live with cover bands that I've been in. Why? Because I have an acoustic drum kit and my snare drum is never going to go doosh like Rick Allen's does, because it's processed. It's this big note wise. Mine is a gunshot and it sounds stupid. Everybody who tries to play When the Levee Breaks, it doesn't sound right. It's never going to sound right because you can't replace that echo. You can't replace the delay that's on it, the room, everything else, plus where John places the notes is so solid, but it creates this whole extra sense of rhythm that is naturally in most live settings impossible to duplicate.
Okay, well, let's move on to your second example here, and you can explain it. So you say another spectacular example, drummer Chester Thompson plays much more forward on the beat. This is Abacab live from, I think it was Wembley 97, right?
Yeah.
Especially in comparison to Phil Collins. Listen to this live version. Ignore the fact that the song itself is quicker. It's about where Chester is placing his snare on beats 2 and 4. It is right on the front edge and stays there. So why did you pick this one?
I was watching some interviews with some bass player, and I forgot to write his name down, but he had played with Chester, and he was commenting that he believed that Chester was a more forward pusher of that dash. He stays more up front. And this was a good example because Abacab has such a tight groove to it. And again, let's not confuse tempo. It's faster than the studio record, but we're still talking about its relativity as to where notes are placed. And he does. He is a little bit, to my ears, it's got a little push to it. Now, push is not bad. Push is not bad. Push can be propulsive. It creates energy. It creates momentum. It creates a forward kind of thrust. And there's some really great drummers, and many of them are my heroes, who play like that. Ian Pace is great like that. He pushes. Cozy pushes. They're not out of time, but they have a more forward push. Phil is more laid back. And as you're going to see in the rest of your comment here, at what mark? I put down where it was in the song.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I'll read the rest of it. Now
Yeah.
go to the 419 mark when Phil joins in. His snare and Chester's are a touch off at the start. They aren't in sync, and Phil asserts domination, and Chester now follows him, and it settles in a little more behind the beat.
Right. Phil joins him in that beautiful middle section. Da, 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 and when Phil comes in, da, 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 and his snare at first, for the first bar or so, those snare drums are just a bit off with each other. And then they lock right in. And I believe that Chester is following Phil.
But we're also faked out a little bit by the fact that the bass is now a thumping 4-on-the-4 bass. And then Phil's kind of, I think he might be 4-on-the-floor bass as well, bass drum on this, right?
Plus
so that anchors us and slows us down.
Plus he's doing all the syncopations. And he's doing all the tomflurries and everything else.
Yeah. Push and pull. Yeah.
And but it is a good example because the two of them are so perfectly capable of playing in sync. There's a million examples of them live where they just together are almost, perfect lockstep. But when Chester plays on his own, they feel different than when Phil plays the same parts on the albums by himself. They sound different. One's not better or worse. They're just different.
Yeah. And I love this. I love these two lists that you gave here. Now, one doesn't have songs on it, but this is great. So if anybody still doesn't have a clue what the heck we're talking about kind of thing, I think this is probably going to clear it up for you, because as you recognize some of these names of songs and play them in your head, you're going to realize what Peter's talking about here. So he says, here are some great examples of songs where the drummer plays behind the beat. AC/DC Back in Black, Phil Rudd, James Brown, Cold Sweat, Clyde Stubblefield, Steely Dan, Babylon Sister, Bernard Purdie, Police, Wrapped Around Your Finger, Stuart Copeland, Led Zeppelin, T for One, John Bonham, Temptations, My Girl, Benny Benjamin, David Gilmour, Near the End, Jeff Porcaro, Pink Floyd, Pigs, three different ones, Nick Mason, The Band, The Night They Drove, Old Dixie Down, Levon Helm, Beatles, A Day in the Life, Ringo Starr, Michael Jackson, Billie Jean, Leon and Ndugu Chancellor, John Mayer, Heartbreak Warfare, Steve Jordan, U2, Sunday Bloody Sunday, Larry Mullen Jr., Tom Petty Breakdown, Stan Lynch, Frank Zappa, Joe's Garage, The Song, Vinnie Colaiuta, Nirvana, In Bloom, Dave Grohl, Alice in Chains Wood, Sean Kinney, Eagles, Life in the Fast Lane, Don Henley. So yeah, some great examples there. I don't know. Do you want to pick out one or two there and just sort of explain a little further?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. And it's interesting that we look at a list like this. Who are we talking about? AC/DC, James Brown, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Band, Michael Jackson, Frank Zappa. I mean, we're talking a pretty stellar list of all-time great bands. The Eagles, they all have drummers who, in my opinion, and the Rolling Stones on here as well, who naturally play a little behind the beat. And to someone who goes to a club and doesn't know a band or anything, they may not be able to articulate it. If you have two different bands, and let's say they play the exact same set list for argument's sake, the first drummer has a tendency to play a little more ahead. People hear the song and they like the song, but then the next drummer comes in and he plays more behind. All of a sudden, they feel a little more at ease. They don't know why. It's simply because that drummer plays in a different pocket, groove, feel, whatever terminology we want to use, and makes those songs sit more naturally. We don't like anxiety unless we really like things to make us on edge intentionally. We like to be a little more comfortable. That's been true with classical music and everything, which is why when The Rite of Spring was premiered with Stravinsky, it scared the living hell out of everybody because it was so jarring. Rhythmically, it was out of our norm. It caused panics. There were people going crazy. It was just music. We say that now, but it really jarred them because we have norms. And, you know, we look at somebody and we look at these drummers, Stan Lynch, Clyde Stubblefield, Jeff Porcaro, you know, Bernard Purdy, Phil Rudd, John Bonham. These are all guys who are really high at people's favorite lists. And it may be because of this or that and the other thing, but at a feel analysis, all of them have very good, solid, comfortable grooves to them that make other musicians who play with them more comfortable. One of the first roles of a drummer, make the people around you more comfortable, put a foundation that is solid and stable so they can shine on top of it.
You know, I got to mention also, like the first thing on your list here, Back in Black. It's never really, I could totally hear it now that you bring it up as an example. It probably never crossed my mind to think about it in this way, but I feel like part of the behind the beat of that song, again, is I feel like there's reverse decay in everything, in the bass drum, the snare, all the cymbals. It feels so I think you can, you know, a signal that goes to your brain that helps you, you know, produce the idea of thinking that it's behind the beat is when the drummer makes that whack, but you don't hear anything. You hear it a minute fraction of a second later after he hits it, right? And to me, the way Mutt Lange in the old Warm production days when he was not really Mutt Lange yet, you get that from it. And the other thing you get in Back in Black is you get the pregnant pause build towards the accents, right? And that in itself is a more literal definition of behind the beat in your head, even if you're not a drummer, kind of thing. So there's all these extra little signals that they pile on to make you think that, right?
I have said this in other things that we've been on. I was fortunate to play with an AC/DC tribute band in Chicago. And I'm telling you, in all the years that I've been playing, Martin, covering those songs was the most challenging drum gig I've ever had. Not from a notes or a technique, from flashes or flurries or chops. It was the precision of it. It was the simple fact that there is so much bloody space and you expose yourself so much by, if you get bored, if your mind wanders, if you decide to want to be a slightly bit overly creative because you're, want to be flashy, you will stand naked with your pants down in the middle of Times Square because the songs will expose you. And
a great one on this list that is like that is The Police wrapped around your finger.
Oh my God, yes.
Complete space, right?
The slower the track is, and the one I really love on here, and I'll finish my AC/DC point and then go to that song, is that they're unison punches. They're band punches, not drummer punches. Angus and Malcolm have created this where we're going to emphasis, where we're going to establish out of the regular beat. And you better be there right on the money or it is a train wreck and it just will not sound good. So from a mental standpoint, having to be so disciplined to play that minimalistic is so challenging. The track I want to talk about is T for One from Zeppelin, because this is a masterclass. After the intro, once the groove settles in, oh my goodness, there's so much space between the notes. And when you're metaphorically, your dash is now this big, you get antsy without a lot of discipline or technique or maturity. Not on this. It's that same space between the next one. And you're like, wait, now. And Bonham was a master at it. And he was able to still make something, and this is a great skill. Being able to apply emotion, intensity, and movement on something that is that slow is such a great, great skill. We've talked about Vinny Appice all the time. Bill Ward, of course, did it first. But Vinny is probably my favorite drummer who plays slow tempos, but still can push you forward while he is still playing slow. And it is
a great point. Yeah.
It is gorgeous.
Yeah. And there's a power there. And, you know, and John Bonham, again, he sends those symbols by, he sends those signals by having the very splashy cymbals.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that caused that. Okay. So I love this, because now we'll go into the idea of ahead of the beat. And again, now that you've seen this list of songs, you know, or heard this and the description, you know what it is, but it's still a very abstract, strange concept. So next, Peter writes, she goes, nearly all the greats will naturally play just a touch behind, even at faster tempos. Some drummers sit a bit more centered on the beat. Some live, just plain, some live just plain rush. Bobby Rondinelli, Nico McRae, and Eric Carr are all players who were known to push or rush. It makes the music not settle well. Tempo and placement are not the same thing. One doesn't have to play slowly to play behind the beat, and the same in reverse. It is all relative. It is much more challenging at slower tempos because the target is much bigger, as there is way more space between the notes. Some of the drummers who drive or push their bands: Clive Burr, Ian Pace, Carl Palmer, Nico McBrain, Tommy Lee, Tommy Aldridge, Cozy Powell, Dave Lombardo, Eric Singer, and many others. So that's really cool, because again, even if you're not a drummer, just hearing Peter's list of these drummers and you start playing those songs in your head, you can understand what he's talking about. You feel that rush of excitement, that, come on, let's hurry up. Let's get to the end of the song. We all got to get to the pub before it closes. And you think of Clive Burr, and you think of even just Run to the Hills, right? And you just hear that excitement and that rush in it. So it is funny. You can play ahead of the beat as well. And I guess looking at, you know, Peter's description of this, I guess, would you say, Peter, so the idea is when he is making those whacks, whatever they happen to be on, you hear them right away and they're at the front of that dash. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, they're much more immediate. You're on your edge of your seat as opposed to cozy sitting back in your armchair. You're now up front. There's something that just causes you to move a little bit. And just as similar, the warnings for being too far behind, you have to heed the warnings when you're too far ahead. Because I think, you know, if you're picking a lesser of evils, you know, you talk about singers, what would you rather have? Now, obviously, you'd rather have them sing on pitch, but if they're going to be off, you'd rather have them just be slightly flat than go sharp. Sharp hurts. If they're overstretching the note, you go, ugh. If it's a little flat, you can kind of forgive it and call it a blue note. But if you're a drummer, if you're on the rushing side, now we've got a problem. What we have then is perfect examples of almost, sorry, Nico, don't mean to pick on you. A lot of those Live Maiden shows, starting with around Live After Death through Made in England, through that whole section, obviously one of the things that bothered Adrian Smith the most, and one of the reasons why he left, is that the songs had lost their feel. Everything was, and it's not just that they played it too quickly. They would count off a song that Nico would count, and within 3 or 4 bars, he's already jumped a bunch of metronomic beats, and he's already playing it faster than he just counted it off, which is wildly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel good.
But the positive part of playing ahead of the beat is that it's almost like a couple of cups of coffee to everybody else. They're feeling motivated, ambitious, anxious, competitive. They feel like they have to keep up. So they're now alert, and they're now even more on their game, kind of thing. Right?
Let's use a perfect example. And I'm sorry to use this because I know you don't care for the song, but let's take Child in Time from Made in Japan. The early section where it is vocals and everything, Ian Pace plays way behind. His little ticky cymbal things, his little bass drum accents are way behind. And when he comes in on the ooze, it is relaxed, it is settled, it is comfortable. But as soon as they hit Blackmore's solo section, it's like you plugged in the extra batteries and all of a sudden Ian Pace is on top and pushing hard during that solo section. And that dichotomy within the same song is so exciting. Excuse me. And then he goes back to it at the end and then it builds. And he's so good at that. Another great example is what he plays with You Fool No One on Cal Jam. He's right in the pocket during the verses and the choruses. They hit the solo section. And I love it because the camera kind of just shoots right in on Ian and you can see him just thundering away. And it's not about how much or little he's playing. It's where he's putting the beats. It's where now he's got a propulsiveness to it. And now he is saying, follow me. Here we go. I'm in charge. I'm right. Everybody else follow me. And he never crosses that line. I never heard in all the zillion Purple recordings I've heard, I've never heard Ian Pace rush ever. And it's just so beautiful. And it is a skill, and he knows when to use it and when not to use it based on the material that he's playing. And I think that's,
and the interesting thing about You Fool No One is that because there's so much offbeat playing in it, that I think offbeat playing seems like it could give you the freedom to do a good job at playing either behind the beat or ahead of the beat.
Well, it's a perfect segue, Martin, because the busier the drummer is, notes wise, rhythms wise, beats wise, there's less space you have to account for because you're actually playing in those spaces. So someone who is much busier, those spaces take care of themselves because you're actually playing through them, not waiting for them. And that's the difference. Simple is always harder and more challenging than busy. There's lines. There's not many who can play like Caliuta or, when they blow chops and those kinds of things, but those are rare moments in their drumming lives where they do it intentionally as a solo or to show off or that kind of thing. But when he goes to pockets, holy crap, I could have included the entire 10 Summoners Tales with Sting. Caliuta's drumming in that is epic. There's so much space, it's stupid.
Oh my God. Speaking of Vinny and speaking of Zappa, Chad Wackerman is a crazy example of behind the beat, right?
You don't get into Zappa's band if you can't.
Yeah.
It's just that simple. You can't. And there's a reason that Bobby Rondinelli didn't last past the second one. Good grief. I'm looking right at the cover.
What band are you thinking of?
Rainbow.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
By the time you get to Bend Out of Shape, he's not there.
Yeah.
Because
Straight Between the Eyes. Yeah.
Straight Between the Eyes. There we go. Thank you. Another senior moment. Because he was rushing too much live, and Richie does not tolerate rushing.
But, Chad is a funny case because Chad, it gives you that idea that we haven't even brought up yet about the behind the beat thing. Behind the beat is also like you're groggy, you're drunk, you're feeling a little good, you're stumbling a little, right? And Chad has got that great stumbling, loping quality to him, right?
Yeah. And a guy that was on here, Levon Helm, nobody would ever accuse Levon of being a technical powerhouse. But he does exactly what he needs to within the compositions that they write. And he almost has a sloppy kind of, you almost think he's going to drop his sticks because, it's just kind of so fluidy and but it's just bam, right where you need it to be. Charlie never looks like he's exerting much, versus the guys who are, more octopus-like. And it's just knowing where to place that note.
Yeah.
And it's a great thing because when we look at some of the busier drummers, especially some of the more metal drummers, the ones that can really line up are the ones that people recognize and go, oh, there's something there. And I'm not here to pick on Lars, but one of the problems with Lars is that his target, I mean, he's all over the place, and that makes me comfortable. But then you go to listen to somebody like Mickey D, and now you can hear the difference and just go, okay, that just feels different. Never mind what he may or may not be actually playing. It just feels different. Yeah. You hear that King Diamond stuff and you're just like, wow, it just settles. You don't feel unease, and it just sits. And that is the skill. And then to be able to play technically on top of it just puts you in another class. So pushing has its place, and it really has a purpose. And again, usually the more up tempo, the heavier bands will use more of that kind of thing. What we noticed here is the examples, a lot of real pop stuff. It's a lot of 70s, that kind of thing. It was about feel. It was about pocket, and the drummers who were the studio mavens, Hal Blaine, good God, Hal could sit behind the pocket, and that's how you kick out 4 or 5 tunes, a day out there in the wrecking crew, because it felt good. And if it doesn't feel good, they're not moving on. I mean, those Beach Boys records feel ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. And in closing, you've this is great because you've actually done a little bit of a summary here. When you were messaging me, you said, here's a great point of reference: exactly on the beat, solidity, pocket strength, certainty, confidence; behind the beat, weight, density, laid back, feel, intensity, relaxation, air, space, importance. But if overdone, it can generate a lack of energy and floppiness. Ahead of the beat, excitement, momentum, drive, passion, energy, power, urgency, push, ! But if overdone, it creates anxiety and tension, unsettledness.
Right.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
And it all comes down to the players that you play with. And in real quick summation, it is essential that you play with players who have a similar mentality. A drummer who plays behind the beat, who plays with a bass player who likes to push the beat, you've got problems. Somebody needs to be in charge. I tend to believe it's the drummer, and I'm going to make my case. But you have to have a similar sense of where you want to place, because that's the only way that stuff locks in. And especially in a slower tempo, somebody who's at the front of that dash versus somebody who's at the end, you've got a problem, because it is never going to feel right, because they're doing that.
Yeah, wicked. All right. Well, let us know in the comments below if this made sense to you, and other examples of behind the beat and ahead of the beat. I thought this was a great discussion. Peter really straightened me out on this, or not straightened me out on this, actually. That's even better way to say it. Yeah, this has been a great discussion. We're going to come back with some other drum-related themes as well. But yeah, subscribe, hit like, all that great stuff. We've got merch, we've got Patreon and stuff. But yeah, wanted to thank Peter for coming back, and we shall talk to you again soon, and it will definitely be about some drumming.